Hello, everybody. It is my privilege to welcome you once again to Word on Wednesdays Live. Word on Wednesdays Live. Good to be here. It's a beautiful day today. I hope you had a chance to get outside a little bit, do some things. I did a few things outside today, and it was a real privilege to do it. Didn't have to put on a jacket to do things. Got a little warm from doing them. I mean, that's a good feeling. The way things have been not too long ago that we've been doing our studies and talking about the weather from time to time. Just a reminder, I changed the sign out here, one of the signs anyway that I do that's close to the parsonage it's the one sign that I do, I should say it that way. I don't do all three signs, but I changed this one to reflect our upcoming Easter egg hunt, and that will be on April the 3rd, a Saturday, 9 o'clock in the morning. So if you've got little ones or know of little ones, you might want to tell them about it, and we'll be here doing an Easter egg hunt, and should be a good time had by all. So exciting to think that we get to do Easter together this year at the church. Last year, we didn't get to do that. In fact, this Sunday, which is the 14th, last year at this time, March the 15th, was the last Sunday we had services before we shut down for the whole COVID thing and the pandemic and what have you. And then learned how to do all the kinds of things like we're doing tonight with this Bible study. So it's just good to be with you. We're doing Daniel, the prophet in exile. That's our series that we're into. And we just took two of our lesson sessions to study this great image of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, as recorded in Daniel chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, dreamt of an idolatrous image of a man. The image had a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet partly iron and partly clay. The materials found in this image, moving from head to toe, decrease in value. You have gold, then silver, then bronze, iron, and then finally clay. Now, moving from head to toe in this revealed prophecy describes a movement in time. Here's my little statue that we got. On behalf of the Academy, I am very grateful and want to thank my mother and the postman and everybody else. Anyway, this goes from moving from Nebuchadnezzar's time, present time, and on into the future, even past our time. This is the essence of what God reveals to Nebuchadnezzar in this dream. God gave him this dream. There are 4 Gentile or non-Jewish empires represented here in succession, right? Remember, the head of gold is Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel told him, you are this head of gold. It's Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. Babylon was eventually conquered by the Medes and the Persians under Cyrus the Great. That's represented by the silvery chest and arms. Alexander the Great and his Greek empire are the belly and the thighs of bronze, with Alexander unseating the Medes and the Persians. The Greeks, in turn, are brought under the Roman Empire, those legs of iron that we have here, and nobody takes down the Roman Empire. It collapses from within, and thus its influence lives on into this day. In the several nations of Europe, especially, where it was in control, the influence there is felt even to this day, and it continues on, and there will be a revived Roman Empire toward the end in this feat of iron and clay aspect down here at the bottom. But there's a weakening of this human Gentile structure with this feat of iron and clay. This thing is man-made, and that is not just this, but the image that was in Nebuchadnezzar's dream was man-made. Let's take a look at something else here. All this Bible prophecy stuff ties together. These feet represent that revived Roman Empire. And the 10 toes, I should have mentioned that. The 10 toes on there may well represent a 10-nation confederacy in modern Europe that will take place during the time of the Antichrist. Back in September of last year, in our Wow Live studies on the book of Revelation, in September, near the end, in fact, it was the 23rd of September, we were in Revelation chapter 17. In fact, I think it was our second lesson. We had taken 2 lessons to talk about Revelation 17 because I found it to be very significant. And while we were there, we looked at these verses, verses 3 through 5. John the Apostle was the one writing this, and so we have I, John, which of course I put that in there. It's not in the text, but to remind us who this is. I, John, saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And those 10 horns on that beast correspond to the 10 toes on Nebuchadnezzar's dream image, you see. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written. Get to the next slide here. On her forehead a name was written. Now take note of this name. Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Notice that Babylon figures strongly in the imagery of this woman riding the scarlet beast in Revelation 17. Mystery Babylon, mother of harlots, abomination of the earth. In our Revelation study, we took this Mystery Babylon thing all the way back into history, back beyond the empire of Nebuchadnezzar, actually. And we talked about the empire, the first empire that we have record of in the Bible, the empire of Nimrod at Babel. That was the origin of all the nations of the world. And when Abraham is called out of those nations, we get the sense that we are to hold those nations that came out of Babel in contrast to the one nation that God established through Abraham. And that's those nations that were not of Abraham, as far as being of Israel, of course, are referred to as Gentiles, in the Bible. In September of last year, I said that this woman of Revelation 17 represents the evil supernatural forces that would lead humanity away from God. She is the evil temptress that entices the entire world. This great harlot of Babylon represents a one-world belief system, a one-world religion that has nothing to do with the actual creator of us all. Take note that she rides on the back of this beast. And this beast represents the uniting of the nations, those nations formed in Babylon under one global government. They were split up. Everybody wants to keep getting back together. And that's why we have so many wars and everything else, because of this desire to bring everybody under one head. Of course, the ones who want to do that, they're the ones that invade and conquer and attempt to conquer and cause all kinds of havoc for everybody else. Anyhow, this means that she is riding upon the nations. When she's seated on this beast, she's riding upon the nations, essentially driving them. This tells us that an underlying philosophy or belief system dominates different nations, and that's what drives them to do what they do. Godless belief systems serve as the fundamental underpinnings of the governments of the world system in which we live. And when I say godless, I mean those that do. That's the rejection of the God of the Bible, the rejection of the God who made us, rejection of our Creator. Okay? And it's been that way for millennia, and it's still true today. We can see at the end of time, this mystery Babylon really is a unified one-world religion driving the political system, and it's riding on the back of this revived Roman Empire, this vast one-world government. Of interest that's pertinent to this, the European Union has as its symbol Europa from Greek mythology, riding the Greek god Zeus. Zeus had taken the form of a bull, a beast, that he might abduct her because he found her beautiful. So it's sort of a Beauty and the Beast kind of mythos there, right? And it's represented in that story of Europa and Zeus as a bull. And this is where the symbol that Europe has chosen for its unity. Here you see Europa bearing the flag of the European Union, riding on the bull. Think of that 10-nation confederacy of former nations that were under Rome, and that's really what you have in much of Europe, right? Europa and the bull also are put on the euro and have been on there for some time. This is becoming common symbology. And lest you think that Europe is the only place in the world where this iconic image of a woman riding upon a beast has been utilized, well, hey, here's an image of pop star Katy Perry riding a beast during the 2015 Super Bowl halftime show. She's riding a tiger instead of a bull. And what's interesting about that is the tiger actually is closer to the leopard-like beast that is described in Revelation 17. So if anything, this is even closer to what we see in the book of Revelation. Whoops, went too far there. Sorry, back it up to Katy there. Because you have to ask yourself, why Katy Perry, who started her career singing gospel music, would suddenly appear as Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Is she just symbolizing evil to remind us Christians that there's evil in the world, or do you think there's something else going on? Who are the handlers of her career? That's an important question. Who laid out this program for the Super Bowl? Who lays out the programs regularly for the Super Bowl halftime shows? And who exactly promoted this one world religion, one world government motif at one of the most watched TV productions in our nation? What exactly is going on? That's a fair question. What's happening in our culture? And if we weren't wondering that in 2015, we certainly started to wonder it in 2020. The great image in Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 2 represents this religious political system. It's the same thing. It comes to an end when a stone cut without human hands smashes into the great image on its feet of iron and clay. The entire image falls away to dust, and the wind blows it away. You might recall we had this stone to represent what we were talking about last time, the stone that strikes the image at its feet and comes down and blows those feet of iron and clay to smithereens, and the whole thing turns to dust, and it's blown off. This stone is not human-formed. It's cut out without human hands. It's the eternal kingdom of Jesus Christ on earth. Jesus had called this these empires that controlled Jerusalem in particular, he called them the times of the Gentiles. We looked at this last week, Luke 21, verses 20 to 24. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart. And let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, revenge. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. These are the days of vengeance, says Jesus, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant in those days, and to those who are nursing babies in those days. For there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Notice that during the times of the Gentiles, these four great Gentile kingdoms that we saw on that image, during this time, Jerusalem is being trampled underfoot by the Gentiles. That's what Jesus says. From Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon on through the present, Jerusalem, as we said last week, has been under Gentile control. In fact, during the Roman Empire in 132 A.D., Jews were banned from Jerusalem, and it remained that way for over 1,800 years. In the early 1900s, with Great Britain having control of Palestine, Jews began to return to the land, and in 1948, Israel became a nation. But the Gentiles still have control over the vital parts. As I said last week, the key piece of Jerusalem real estate that matters prophetically is that Temple Mount. And that is presently under Muslim control. Very, very interesting that that is the holdout. When Christ returns, he will set foot on the Mount of Olives. Zechariah 14 verse 4 prophesies this from the Old Testament. And in that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, making a very large valley. Half the mountain shall move toward the north, and half of it toward the south. Now the picture on this slide that I've got up for you shows Jesus sitting on the Mount of Olives. And he's teaching his disciples what we just read a moment ago from Luke chapter 21, similar passage in Matthew chapter 24 in the Bible. And he's teaching that on the Mount of Olives. It's called the Olivet Discourse. Now, directly behind Jesus in this picture, you can see the eastern wall of Old Jerusalem, where you will see that the artist has put a column of smoke rising into the air. Take a look. It's up there right up above directly up from his right hand that he has held out there, and close to his forehead. You can see the smoke coming up there. That smoke is rising from the Temple Mount. And you can see the main building of the temple just beyond that smoke in the background. When Jesus returns to the Mount of Olives, he will be facing west, directly at the Temple Mount. And the Mount of Olives, upon which he descends in power and glory, will split in half. I don't believe Jesus will gently approach that mount in light-footed landing, okay? The judge of the earth is returning, and his feet will slam into the ground in a thunderous earthquake, shattering the Mount of Olives in two pieces. And Jesus, the coming Messiah of Israel, will himself retake the Temple Mount in judgment. Jesus, you see, is that stone that reduces the times of the Gentiles to powdery dust, and he blows them away. God reveals all of this to King Nebuchadnezzar in this image of this large humanly manufactured idol being busted apart by a stone uncut by any human hand. It's a God-cut stone, right? Once Nebuchadnezzar understood his dream, he bowed before Daniel. He commanded his attendants to give Daniel an offering and an incense, essentially worshiping Daniel. Obviously, this pagan king's worship is misplaced. He seems to see Daniel as something of a god. This is how his pagan viewpoint causes him to think. He does say that Daniel's God is the God of all gods. Still, he is obviously worshiping Daniel in this passage at the end of chapter 2. And he made Daniel ruler over the whole province of Babylon. And Daniel 2 finishes up where it says, Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Now here's a train of thought that I engaged in as I considered a transition from Daniel 2 to Daniel chapter 3, which is our main focus tonight. Number one, take note, Nebuchadnezzar sees Daniel as divine. We just saw that here where he's bowing before him and giving him incense and an offering. Secondly, Daniel told him that he, Nebuchadnezzar, was the head of gold on that image. Okay, so that's significant. He takes note of that. I'm the head of gold. Thirdly, Nebuchadnezzar is over Daniel in power, right? He appoints Daniel to all these different things, and Daniel serves under him. He was going to put Daniel to death if they couldn't get an answer to his dream thing. He undoubtedly, therefore, views himself as divine. So he, therefore, must also be worshipped. And hence, I believe that's what leads us to see this story unfolding in Daniel chapter 3 for this evening, verses 1 to 3. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Nebuchadnezzar's pride gets the best of him here. He sets up this image of himself to be worshipped. He thinks he's a god. He sees himself as a divine being of some sort. As you probably know, it was not all that uncommon in these ancient cultures to assume that the king or the Pharaoh, or the Caesar, or whomever, was divine and deserved to be worshipped as divine. That was one of the things that got the Christians in trouble in the first century, that they refused to worship Caesar, because they worshiped Christ instead. What I find interesting is that the book of Daniel records that this image of gold was set up after Nebuchadnezzar had this dream of an image made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay, and Nebuchadnezzar was told that he was the gold, the most precious metal in the whole thing. He was the head of gold. It's almost like he reasons, well, Daniel has this divine connection with his God, who's obviously multiple times better than the gods of the rest of my wise men. I threatened them with their very lives, and they couldn't tell me the dream or its meaning. Their gods failed them, but Daniel did. He told me. Daniel's God then said that I, Nebuchadnezzar, I'm the head of gold. Obviously, I am chief among all of these others who are coming after me. I deserve to be worshipped. I'm setting up an image. So he sets it up. I believe that really this image set up in Dura, in the plain of Dura, was his response to this whole dream thing. Now, you might have noticed there that the picture I've used for this image of gold, take a look at it there off to the side, it doesn't look like what is normally described or portrayed whenever this image is the topic of a sermon or especially a Sunday school lesson, like when we were kids and we had those flannel graph things that were being put up. It didn't look like that at all. We usually think of Nebuchadnezzar's image of gold in Daniel chapter 3 looking like the large full figure on the right there. That's what we picture. But I use the picture of the small figure that's fixed to the top of a column as shown on the left. Let me explain to you why I did that. Look at the dimensions given to us there in Daniel 3, verse 1. The image is 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. The image is 10 times taller than it is wide. Now, that's not how a human image, a human form, is proportioned, okay? That gets kind of ridiculous looking if you do that. We're assuming, of course, Nebuchadnezzar put up an image of himself, okay? If a human image were created with those proportions, 10 times as tall as it is wide, the result would be something like this. That looks a little comical. It's kind of bizarre. Remember those really skinny Santa Clauses that came out years ago? I thought, boy, they look kind of weird. And so it's because of that I think that there was some kind of pedestal or column or pillar upon which the image stood, like the column idea on the extreme left there. Here is the ancient obelisk at Karnak Temple in Egypt. Its proportions are fairly close to being 10 times as tall as it is wide, like the image described in Daniel 3. You can see a second obelisk at the site, off to the right of that one, behind that wall, probably 10 times as tall as it is wide as well. Now, the two objects here, I put the golden image there on the side of the one here in the center, just for comparison. And those two objects, they weren't the same height, but they're close. The Egyptian obelisk there is 97 feet tall. And the Babylonian image at 60 cubits with an 18-inch cubit, the Babylonian image would have been about 90 feet tall. So 90, 97, really close. Just to kind of show you how closely they look to each other, I superimposed the Babylonian pillar over the Egyptian obelisk for comparison. I just sized the height of the Babylonian image and raised it up, kept the proportions the same, just made it as tall as that. And look how closely it matches that pillar. I think the artist who drew the Babylonian pillar and created that image probably based it on an Egyptian obelisk, and that makes sense because the proportions are basically the same, 10 times as wide at the base as it is high. I suppose it could be possible the Babylonians even based their design on these Egyptian obelisks because they preceded the Babylonian culture. The Egyptians had them about 1,000 years before Babylon was an empire. There were more obelisks in Egypt than just the two that we see here in this photograph. I read where the Romans, after they conquered Egypt, they began taking obelisks back to the city of Rome. And today, there are 13 Egyptian obelisks in Rome. That's more than there are in Egypt today. That's rather fascinating. In fact, one of those obelisks in Rome, Egyptian obelisks, is in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican, right across from the obelisk of the dome of the Cathedral of St. Peter in Vatican Square. Okay. These Egyptian-style obelisks are everywhere, but the best-known one based on it to us in the United States is, of course, the Washington Monument, which, by the way, it also happens to be right across from a Capitol dome, doesn't it, in the mall there in Washington, D.C. Very interesting. Seems to be some kind of symbolism going on there. The monument here in Washington is 55 feet at the base, square, 55 each side, 55 feet, and 555 feet tall. Again, basically 10 times as tall as it is wide. And somewhat cryptically, 555 feet equals 6,660 inches in height. And even the 55 feet square at the bottom, those 55 feet, it's about 666 inches at the base. Revelation 13:18 says, "Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man." All this is about man-made, man-centered stuff that we're talking about here with these Gentile empires. It's the number of a man. And his number is 666. So, what does this mean exactly for the Washington Monument and our country and stuff like that? Well, I'm not sure exactly, but I do believe that the design of the Washington Monument at 6,660 inches in height is no accident. It wasn't like, oh, look at that. I didn't realize when I did. No, I think they knew. Whoever designed it knew what was going on. And you know, there could have been some sort of mystical occult significance to building structures 10 times as tall as they are wide at the base. Interesting to think about. Okay, getting back to Daniel chapter 3, since we can't go much further with that tonight. All the dignitaries and all the officials from all the provinces of Babylon have assembled before this image. And verse 4 says, "Then a herald cried aloud, 'To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So it's kind of like, well, do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? Fiery furnace, bowing down, I'm going to bow down, that kind of thinking, right? So at that time, verse 7, when all the people heard, got ahead here a little bit, all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre in symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations and languages fell down, and they worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, the event described in this passage, it's fairly straightforward. The music obviously served as a cue to bow before the image to worship it. Anybody not complying will be killed, thrown into the fire of a furnace. So, that raises a question for me. Did they just build a furnace to throw people in, or was there a furnace already there? What's a huge furnace doing in Babylon? Well, it turns out Nebuchadnezzar had his people making their own bricks, fired bricks. In the Exodus, we read of the Israelites making bricks, but they were making mud bricks that were sun-dried. All right, these bricks were formed and they were fired in the furnace. All right, here's a website called Ancient Pages, and they have this description from an article they have on Babylon and the bricks. Babylon was a symbol of greatness, power, and destruction. It was a place you either feared or loved. To protect Babylon from intruders and make the city magnificent, King Nebuchadnezzar II ordered his workers to build temples and other buildings using especially hard kiln-fired bricks. And it's my understanding that he had his name imprinted upon each of the bricks that went into this. And when Saddam Hussein began to rebuild Babylon when he was ruling there, he started reconstructing some of this and used bricks, and his name was imprinted on the bricks for the new buildings that he was building to rebuild the Babylonian temple and other structures that were there. Very interesting kind of stuff. Anyway, it was Nebuchadnezzar's hope and goal that palaces, temples, and walls would last longer if they were constructed with such building materials, as opposed to the frequently used sun-dried bricks that were often unstable. So, the fiery furnace of Daniel chapter 3 was a brick oven. All right? If they did build a tall pedestal or pillar for that image of Nebuchadnezzar, like I was talking about earlier, that column or pillar, that furnace may well have been there right by the construction site for this thing to build that pillar. So kind of lends credibility a little bit to that story. We ought to talk here about the concept of worship. I had that highlighted in the passage earlier. That's why I'm putting that up there. You shall fall down and worship the gold image. Worship. The word worship comes from an older English word, worthship, W-O-R-T-H, ship. It means to ascribe worth to something, right? Or to someone. To recognize that someone or something is worthy of your complete surrender and devotion. That's worship. If we consider that God described Nebuchadnezzar as the head of gold on that image in the dream that God gave him, then of what exactly was he the head? What was he head of? He was the chief. He was the first ruler among these empires that make up the times of the Gentiles. A temporary system of world domination that will one day be destroyed and blown away by Christ when he returns to earth to set up his eternal kingdom. Now, this world system, as we've said, it's still operating today, and it will continue until, as Jesus said, the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled, and then he returns. The question then comes up for each of us living today. To whom or to what am I giving my complete surrender and devotion? Am I surrendering myself to the spirit of this age, living fully for the things of this world? How many people have spent their lives devoted to temporary things and secondary issues? How many times have you heard someone say something like this? We didn't see our father very much when we were growing up. He worked long hours. He traveled a lot for his job. And I know that there are jobs, of course, that require that sort of thing. And, of course, you need to work, and work hard to support a family. That's the right way to do things. I get that, obviously. And just as obviously, I can't see into the heart of any other dad out there. I've had enough of a time trying to keep track of where my focus has been in life, if I'm going too far one way or too far the other or something like that. But I just have to wonder, though. I have to wonder about these things. I wonder what the cost is. And then you ask yourself, is it worth it? Is the payoff, the gain that I'm getting, worth whatever losses I might be experiencing right now? And sometimes it's not careers or jobs. Sometimes it's hobbies. Sometimes it's recreational activities that can separate us from our loved ones because we get our downtime and we want to say, oh man, I just need to relax and this is what I do to relax and so forth. Is it possible to maybe find a hobby or activity that can include more of the family, that kind of thing? Or does it have to be something that you totally isolate yourself as a man away from your family? I heard a preacher say once something that gave me a little bit of perspective on what we value and how much we value things. He says, if you devote enough time to it and you learn to get your grip just right and you work on how you're standing, your proper posture, how to get properly aligned, and you practice getting your swing just right, one day you will be able to hit a ball with a stick into a hole in the ground. Sure, you can do that. You can pursue that. I'm not trying to take anything away from anybody. I just wonder sometimes about what we value in life, why we value it, and how often we take a hard look at what we're devoting our time and our effort to in this life. Is it worth it? What do we gain by doing this activity? What do we lose? I'm not just picking on golfers. It's just because I heard that saying one time, and it brought all these things into perspective. It could be anything, right? What do we lose? What do we gain? What do we value in life, and how much do we value it? Yes, I'm still talking about worship here. We haven't left that topic at all. It's exactly what I'm talking about. Someone at a church said to me once, think about it. We're not like people in Bible times. We really don't have idols anymore. There's nothing we really bow down before or nothing we really offer sacrifices to. And technically, I suppose that person was right as far as Western civilization goes anyway. But I do think we still have an idolatrous heart. Still a lot of things that garner our attention, draw us away. We devote our strength and our energy, and we invest our time into pursuing something that we think will give back to us in greater measure. We sacrifice our resources, our relationships, even our families for a seemingly greater, seemingly more valuable objective. I want you to take a look at this next picture. Which one on that picture, which one lasts forever? So then, which one is more valuable than all the rest? We really need to get some perspective sometimes. We were designed and created to worship the one who designed and created us. But we say, no, not that. Instead, I want to pursue this. And we take that which we have been given by the Creator and we invest it in devoted pursuit of something else that can never deliver or satisfy. How's that on the stewardship scale? Taking what He's given us and using it wastefully. How sad is that? It's a serious problem when your ability to worship is spent on the wrong thing. It can be very costly. We really need to repeatedly be asking ourselves, is this worth it? Is it really worth it? How much time should I really be devoting to this? Just asking. I can't answer the questions for you. Nor am I judging anyone. I have nobody in mind in this. I have to ask these questions myself. You know, you may have money, and enough power to run the whole world. But if you can't manage your own soul, how much else will you actually destroy and damage while running the world? What shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? And how many more people will you hurt and ruin just because you have more power, more influence? It's like the proverbial bull in the china shop. One slight misstep takes out many incredibly valuable, precious people and shatters their lives. Oops, sorry. Bumped into that and ruined it. I think about this when I look at those moguls who own these giant tech corporations today. The Nebuchadnezzars, the heads of gold of modernity. Too much power, not enough accountability. You can't sow to the wind without reaping the greater whirlwind. You reap what you sow. The damage that they're doing is going to become evident in time. Sadly, what will be the human cost for that? Our response needs to be, don't bow down. Don't bow down to these things. Do not surrender to this world system. Daniel chapter 3, verses 8 to 12. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. That's how you address every king that you come. O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. You know, there's always going to be someone who rats on you. There will always be someone who will only be too happy to report you to the powers that be. Excuse me, but I just thought you'd like to know, O king. There's somebody out here in my neighborhood who is not following your rules. Too many people in their house. O king, live forever. There's someone here who wouldn't bake us a cake for our special event. Can you imagine? How offensive. Destroy them. Or, O Amazonian prince, here is someone who has written words in his book and put pictures in his book with which I disagree, and it is perpetuating ideas that are contrary to most of us good people think is true or acceptable. So I would implore you, make him stop his vicious offenses. Cancel him. And so the king moves to take up the cause, right? Verses 13 and 15. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Now we see here an attitude in the king corresponding to the atheism of our modern age. Who is this God who would deliver you from us and our power? This sounds so much like what we sometimes hear, bellowing from the philosophically unsound halls of higher learning of our time. Commenting on such things many decades ago, Malcolm Muggeridge, a Christian, said, "We have educated ourselves into imbecility." They say stupid and foolish things, but it comes from a respectable source, so everyone bows down. It's kind of like the emperor who had new clothes, which were no clothes at all. But everybody goes along. The pressures may be great on those of us who hold to the truth of Christ. But don't bow. Do not surrender. There's no content there. It's only temporary. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up." I like how they say, "We have no need to answer you in this matter." Basically, it's like, we don't need to have a discussion because our minds are already made up. Whatever the outcome, we will not serve your gods nor worship this image. Like Daniel in chapter 1, they had already purposed all of this in their hearts. That's why they didn't bow, right? As we saw in the sermon this past Sunday, be bold like them. Be fearless. Don't bow down, right? People need to hear the truth of the gospel. We're the ones who have it. If we make concessions and compromises with the world around us, we're going to blow it when it comes to the truth of the gospel and spreading that message. Daniel chapter 3, verses 19 to 23 says, "Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. So then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace." I've always found it remarkable that the men who threw these 3 fellows into the furnace were killed by the flames apparently bursting forth out of the entrance to the furnace. But it didn't even touch Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They weren't even in the furnace yet, and God immediately protects them in the moment. Verses 24 and 25, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, 'Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire?' And they answered and said to the king, 'True, O king.' 'Look,' he answered, 'I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire. 4 men, and they're not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God.'" See, this is why we do not need to bow. This is why we can be bold and fearless. We belong to Christ. The Son of God is with us. God the Son is with us. Now, it's likely that Nebuchadnezzar, being a pagan anyway, spoke in more general terms when he said Son of God. In fact, it's highly likely he had no idea about Jesus, God the Son. That reality was not fully made known until Jesus came to earth. However, none of this means that it was not Jesus in the fire with them. Very well could have been. understand that because of these men's faithful and bold witness, God is now working on Nebuchadnezzar's heart. For all three chapters so far, we've actually seen this happening. God is breaking down the barriers of Nebuchadnezzar's paganism and his pride. And in the next chapter, we'll witness the culmination of this process. Verses 26 and 27. Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire, and the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire wasn't even on them. You know how it is, you sit around a campfire the night before, you wake up the next day, you can still smell the smoke on your clothes, your hair, and everything else. But these guys, it's almost as if they never were actually in the flames, though they were clearly visible to Nebuchadnezzar as he looked into the fire. Since God is the creator of all physical properties and processes, he can suspend them anytime he wants. And that's exactly what God did here. It was miraculous. It was beyond nature. How encouraged these three young men must have been after such an extraordinary experience. And what do you think old King Nebuchadnezzar is thinking? I wonder what he's going through his head. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel. That's a reference to the Son of God. We've learned that a Son of God is a reference to angels in the Bible as well. Who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, boy, I almost wish that they had this law in effect today, because it's the same God that we worship. If anybody speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Nebuchadnezzar has seen this power several times. Then, verse 30, the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Reading there how Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed that these three faithful servants of God yielded their bodies. That challenges me to regularly surrender myself. Beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice unto God, which is your reasonable service. I need to regularly surrender myself, my body, my soul to the Lord, no matter what. And in the next chapter, Nebuchadnezzar will learn what God can do to a body if he so chooses. So I hope you can be with us next time as we move into chapter 4. It's a short chapter, very interesting. Nebuchadnezzar himself writes much of it. So I hope you can come back and join us in the study next week. Thank you for being here this evening, and remember, be bold, be fearless for Jesus. God bless.